Hi there, it's Roy from Sulphur Sabers. So today we're going to look at the new Xeno3 RGB bracelet board. So this will be a operation video on how to operate your Xeno3 RGB bracelet board. So the RGB bracelet board, let's have a look at it. It looks like that. It's a later generation board that we've just recently started stocking here at Sulphur Sabers. You'll note that the board has a SD slot, which as standard ships empty. You can optionally add an SD card into your Saber, but the standard config at the time of recording is just one of a firmware flash that's just flashed directly to the board. So the SD card is also required if you want to turn on some of the lesser used features on the Saber. Again, that has to be configured in a separate config file on the SD card, alongside any additional sound fonts that you may wish to include on the SD. So anyway, the scope of this video will simply be looking at a standard firmware flash without the SD card. Okay, so let's dive into it. So as it stands, your Saber will come to you in deep sleep. So the board has a deep sleep functionality. First thing you want to do if you want to use your Saber is wake it up from deep sleep. Deep sleep being like a battery saving operation, where most of the functionality of the board is disabled by the software to prolong battery life whilst your Saber's idle. But anyway, let's wake it up. So to wake up your Saber, and again, this information will be in the manual, you'll simply hold the button
Power on
for a few seconds and you will hear the Saber start up. Normally at this point, I'll take you through how to turn on and turn off your Saber, but I'm going to jump into the configuration menu instead, mainly because there's a setting that you may want to tweak straight away. So the first set of config changes that you can make whilst your Saber is active but not running is volume adjustment. So the S series of Sabers straight out of the factory are configured to be quite loud. So they have a mute, a low volume and a high volume function. We actually prefer the low volume setting. It's a little bit less verbose and a bit easier on the ear. So one of the first things you might want to do is just pop your Saber into low volume mode. And that's very easy to do with your Saber awake and your button illuminated, or if you have a model without a illuminated button, you just have to work and guess the timing and train yourself on this. You hold the button for about half a second or one button flash, and it'll jump into low volume setting. Do it again. Goes into mute mode. Do it again.
volume high,
High volume.
volume low,
And back into low volume. And like I said, this is the volume that we think is best suited for the Saber there. And it will vary depending on the model. If you have a model whose design is a very good acoustic resonator, which kind of amplifies the volume simply by the shape of the Saber itself, you might want to pop it into low volume. If you have a Saber design that is not particularly suited to amplifying the sound waves from the speaker inside, you can quite happily pop it into a loud volume mode without overloading your ears. Okay, so let's look at some of the other menu options as well. We saw there if we held the button for one flash, we could flick through the volume level settings.
unstable,
Hold it for two flashes, it goes through and sets one of three different blade effects. That one's unstable, which is kind of a bit of a shimmery flashing blade.
pulse,
Pulse is like a slow pulse, or a slow pulse effect on your blade. And the final one,
steady,
nice and easy on the eye, is just a good standard steady blade. And once you've played around with blade effects for a while, you tend to find that quite interesting, but most people will tend to default to the steady blade. If you're using an unstable blade, which is like a flashing blade, just be aware that people around you aren't sensitive to to epilepsy, and photosensitive to epilepsy. Flashing lights can activate that illness in some people, so just be aware of the people around you. Okay, the next one, this is hold the button for 3 flashes. This is actually something in the menu system, but it's more suited for the NeoPixel blades. There's only actually one setting for RGB baselets, and it's just standard mode. And you can't change out of that. So it's just the fact these are dual purpose boards. You can configure them to well, you have to redo all of your electronics, but you can use the same board itself for NeoPixel or baselets, and that's just a remnant of having that option for NeoPixels on the menu system. So if you hold it for 3 flashes, you can't really change out of standard mode, so you can just leave that one be. Okay, next one. So I will make a note that the software developers at the manufacturers have a habit of rolling out new firmware updates for their Sabers. Occasionally the manuals, which are obviously a printed item, lack the software developments. And this is true in this case. There's actually a couple of extra features on the menu now. So just use this video as a reference as opposed to the manual. Okay, so we saw holding the button for 3 flashes did nothing. Let's hold it for 4.
Clash off.
What that does, that turns off the clash effect. So when you're swinging your blade around and you clash against another Saber's blade, normally you get a kind of sound and a blade animation. By selecting clash off, you don't get that. Most people would want that on, so
Clash on.
we'll turn it back on just by holding the button for 4 flashes again. Or each flash is about half a second, so that's about 2 seconds. Right, there's something else they've added that you can turn on and off. Let's hold it for 5. 1.
Motion control off.
And that's motion control. So you can actually turn off your motion control or gesture control functionality on your Saber. Most people would want to keep this. It's quite handy.
Motion control on.
So let's keep it on. So referring back to the manual, as they're currently shipping with your Saber, now would be the option where you hold it for 4 flashes, which is changing to the last font, is now changed to 6 flashes. So if we hold the button for 6.
Motion control
Oh,
off.
sorry, I held it for 5, my mistake.
The protector.
We're now moving backwards through the font preset menu. And there are 16 sound fonts already coded onto your Saber, which is kind of why the Sabers don't ship as standard with the extra SD card for extra sound fonts, because 16 sound fonts is actually quite a lot to navigate through. It's a very well spec'd Saber, and to be honest, you're going to like at least half of them. So there's plenty of Saber fonts on there for you to choose from. So that's the different changes you can make in the configuration menu on your Saber. So anything from 1 flash to 6 flashes will change all of those options for you. Okay, there is also, we mentioned motion control, or some people refer to it as gesture control. You can also use this to do a little bit of navigation. So if you hold your Saber down, perform a twist motion, so you're twisting it along its axis like that. It's easier done with the blade in, and if you struggle with this, just put your blade tip on the floor and do this action. If you twist kind of 180 degrees anti-clockwise and then clockwise again,
The Dark Empress.
you move forwards through the font.
The Sun. The Third Hunter.
Font options. That's a lot easier to do, not on the desktop. So you can see there, holding for 6 flashes goes back 1. Twisting like so allows you to quickly progress through the font menu. So a quick tip with that is if you want to change to a new font, use the gesture control to find the font. If you accidentally go past it, you hold the button for 6 flashes and you'll step back 1 to the font that you actually wanted. Okay, and that is the first part of the video, which basically looks after the configuration menu and some of the things you can just tweak on your Saber. Next, we'll move on to operation. See you soon. Welcome back. So let's look at basic Saber operation. So we saw in a prior video how to configure our Saber. Now, providing you've left motion control on and all of your settings on, you've got a few cool features to play with. But first off, let's look at turning our Saber on and off. Turn your Saber on, you just simply dab the button, like so. You've got the inherent background hum. To turn your Saber off, you just hold the button for 3 flashes and your Saber will deactivate. You have a couple of other options for activating your Saber, providing you've got motion control turned on. First is a swing on activation. You simply just swing your Saber and your Saber will turn on. You've also got a gesture control for turning your Saber off. That is a twist along its axis anti-clockwise and then back clockwise, and your Saber will deactivate. So let's have a look at that now. So swing on. There we have our Saber. So we have the inherent background hum. We have the swing sounds. And if you clash your Saber blade on blade, you get your inherent clash sounds as well. So let me show you the twist off motion. It's quite difficult to do on a desk, but as you can see. Okay, let's just turn it off normally. But to turn your Saber off, it's a motion you have to get used to. Like I said, you twist anti-clockwise and then back clockwise, and your Saber will deactivate. Much easier done with a full-length blade in there. Okay, so let's look at some of the other features as well. With the Saber running, we saw the 3 inherent effects that were played, the hum sound, the swing sounds, and the clash effects. You can also activate blaster blocks. So cast your mind back to the movies when your heroes are escaping a bunch of stormtroopers. They use their Saber to deflect incoming blaster shots, and you can replicate that just by dabbing the button on your Saber. Something else you can activate is, again, cast your mind back to the movies, hero versus villain, Saber against Saber. At some point, inevitably, the Saber blades will touch and stick, because in Saber lore, plasma blades are sticky. So you kind of get that kind of effect on those sticky blades. That's something that you can also replicate with your Saber. Simply as you go in for a swing, you make sure you hold the button, and then when you get that automatic clash, you get that cool little lock-up effect. Holding blade against blade, and then when you pull your blade away, just dab the button again, and that will turn off. There we go. And that's that twist motion, just to turn it off there. Okay, so there is your some of the basic features and things you can activate on your Saber. There's some additional effects that we're just going to look at in the next part of the video, and we'll be right back. Okay, well, welcome back. So let's look at some of the extra features that we have on the Saber. Of quick note, there are a couple that are noted in the manual. Things like lightning block, multi-lock mode, multi-block mode. These are features that need to be activated on with the optional SD card, and they have to be activated in the config, so I understand. So again, they're interesting little features that if you want to explore your Saber a little bit more, you can do just by adding an SD card, adding some additional sound fonts, loading up a configuration file. That will be the topic of a further video. But like I said, we're just looking at the basic firmware flash on the Xeno3 RGB baselet board at the moment. Okay, so as I said, force effect, multi-lock mode, multi-block mode, and I believe lightning block are all optional features that you turn on with the SD card. So let's look at some of the things that you can turn on. So we have a couple of color change modes. So whilst your Saber's running, you can change the color of your blade. There's two ways to do this. And that depends on which way you decide to twist it using your gesture control. So both cases, your Saber needs to be pointed down. Let's put the blade in, that makes things a little bit easier. Okay, and then you just hold the button and twist. So if you hold counterclockwise and then clockwise, you get into standard color change mode. And what you will see is your blade will automatically cycle through a spectrum of colors, and then you just dab the button to lock in the one that you want. A second color change mode that you can activate is done by holding the button and twisting the other way. So you go clockwise, then counterclockwise, and that gets into something called twist color change. So in that color change mode, by twisting the Saber and maybe orientating it around a little bit, the accelerometer on the board and the gyro on the board will basically go through the spectrum of colors. When you get to the color you want, again, you just lock it in by hitting the button. So let's look at that now. With the Saber running, again, quite difficult to do on the desk, so bear with me. Point your Saber down, hold the button, and let's go counterclockwise and then clockwise.
Color change.
And now in color change mode. This color change mode will automatically cycle through a bunch of different colors, and you just pick the one that you want. In this case, I'm going to go for purple.
Color selected.
And your color is selected. Well, I said we did that by holding the button, going counterclockwise and then clockwise for standard color change mode. If we do it the other way, hold the button and go clockwise and then counterclockwise.
Color change.
You get the same audio cue, but when you start moving your Saber around, it will change colors. Green. Sometimes when you rotate it along its axis, it kind of sticks on one color, so you just change the orientation. It goes into purple, blue. There's your lime green. And once you've got a color that you like,
Color selected.
you just lock it in. So that's running a kind of a lime green cyan color, so a lime green with a bit of blue in it. Okay, so that's how you change color on your Saber. So there's a couple of additional features that you can activate as well. These are the ones that tend to leave to last because you kind of use them a couple of times and then you probably never use them again. We saw the popular blaster blocks and blaster deflections. You might use that one a fair bit. You can also stab your hilt. A bit difficult to do on the desk. It's easy with the momentum of a full blade in. And you will get kind of a stab play. It's a bit like a clash effect. And we saw the spin. So what you could also do is something called melt. So if you hold the button and then stab. Oh, again, that's difficult to do on a desk.
Color change.
I've accidentally gone into color change mode. Okay, so stab mode. If you hold the button, stab it. Ironically, I had this working on the first take. It will kind of go like a lock-up, a bit like this. But then if you twist the hilt, it slightly changes shade as you twist. It's not a huge colour change, but it's a bit like Qui-Gon when he was melting through the door early on in Phantom Menace. You kind of get that effect. Again, it's a difficult one to get because it's gesture control, so it may take a little bit of practice. So again, those are just some of the additional effects that you can get on the Saber. So like I said, that's with the standard flash, firmware flash. Again, the config file, the SD card, and the additional config settings will be the topic of a further video. So anyway, other things you can do. If you want to put your Saber will sit there idle for about 20 minutes, and then it will make a very loud audio cue and scare you witless as it goes into deep sleep mode. If you want to go into deep sleep mode straight away, I suggest you do it from your Saber running. Okay, you just hold the button to shut your Saber down as normal, and then continue to hold it for an additional, I think it's about 8 seconds. And it will kick in about now. And your Saber will power off and go into deep sleep mode. And that just allows you to manually put it into deep sleep. Otherwise, if you leave it for about 20 minutes after turning it off, you'll hear that power off audio cue and your Saber will go into deep sleep mode automatically. So there we go. It's a very cool little board. Quite interesting when these came out. And the Xeno3 RGB baselit version, which is this one here, is going to be a great option for dueling. If you haven't yet watched it, make sure you watch the buying advice video where it covers 2 different technologies, baselit, Saber installs, and NeoPixel. One's suited for dueling, one isn't. Your baselit basically looks like that. It's a high-powered lens that shines off a hollow blade, and your NeoPixel is a different tech which has a string of LEDs that run up and down the blade. So one you can use for dueling, and one you can't. So, in our humble opinion, anyone that tells you otherwise is just trying to sell you a NeoPixel Saber and hoping it doesn't break. Okay, so there we go. I mean, that's the RGB Xeno3 baselit board. Any questions, just fire them through. And like I said, if you do want to explore the features of this board further by popping in an SD card and playing around with configs, look for subsequent videos when we publish them. Okay, thanks very much. Bye-bye.